Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would review this sort of video and talk about this subject that I thought would be very particularly interesting. And this is going to be a video where I've talked about this conversation a lot, but I thought that I would probably state it in the most blatant way possible, at least for this video, because, of course, there's been many debate about who the true number one pound for pound fighter actually is. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this is because, of course, you have a lot of these channels, especially from the LDBC and new media, that are very big Terence Bud Crawford fans. And for the past several years, you've had a multitude of fighters that have been debatable or debated amongst a lot of the boxing fans or boxing media as to who is the true number one pound for pound fighter. Of course, once upon a time, there was Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez. Then there was kind of a talk about a mix between Andre Ward or Sergey the Crusher Kovalev. Whoever won that fight would be the number one pound for pound fighter. But then after Andre SOG Ward retired, it was kind of a little bit vacant, and we didn't really know, who really was the true number one pound for pound fighter. Now, if you let the Terence Bud Crawford fanboy channels or the Terence Bud Crawford fans tell it, Terence Bud Crawford has just been whooping ass and taking names against the best level competition, overall, and he's really been the true king overall to the throne. They just keep trying to tear him down. But the truth of the matter is that even though Terence Bud Crawford, even though he's an all-time great level fighter and an exceptional level fighter, there's been very little moments, in all honesty, in his career that when you talk about the complete package, and when I say complete package, I'm not talking about skill set. I'm talking about not only accomplishments, not only skill set, but of course you also have to include the most important part of that package, and that's the resume. And I understand that Terence Bud Crawford fanboys that they'll say, oh, well, he has a fantastic resume, blah, 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 sort of stuff. No, he does not. And don't get it twisted. That's not me stating that Terence Bud Crawford, that he has a horrible resume. But to state something along the lines of that Terence Bud Crawford overall, that his resume is way better than Canelo's and way better than all this other stuff, it's just asinine in my personal view. But I thought that I would state this right now because this video right here by Johnboxing Pound for Pound of Best, a guy that I have reviewed, a few times. I like to do it because Johnboxing Pound for Pound the Best, even though he'll bring up certain good points here and there, he's a great example of another one of these super huge racially motivated channels that bitches and moans and complains about certain rankings and black fighters being disrespected because what has that fighter done to be put over that? But you don't have a problem with Gervonta Tank Davis being ranked as the number 3 guy in the world off of some other channels. Whenever it comes to some of these channels, and not just these guys, not even just the LDBC and new media, everybody, loves to bitch, moan, and complain when it's something that they disagree with. But then when it's something that they agree with, then they say, well, who cares? That's their opinion. Why are you criticizing them? Listen, the whole point of a pound for pound list is that, overall, we are ranking the fighters off of a certain criteria, so of course there is going to be debate. Of course, there's going to be, overall a little bit of criticism if you believe that that pound for pound list is a little bit unjust due. And why not? At the end of the day, that's kind of why debates kind of exist. At the end of the day, you have certain people, for example, that debate that LeBron James is the greatest basketball player of all time. He's not, in my personal view. I would have about 3 to 4 to 5 players over him. But I mean, overall, he's definitely up there. But the point being is that a lot of people overall, they talk about a pound for pound list. And, this is Johnboxing's pound for pound list. And I actually think that this is a very good pound for pound list. But this narrative of Terence Bud Crawford being quote unquote disrespected just because once upon a time they had Lomachenko and Canelo, and also that of now Alexander Usyk over that of a Terence Bud Crawford, this bullshit has got to stop. Because, this narrative of, oh, they just want to keep a brother down, or they would just want to keep, a black fighter down. It would make sense if that fighter had not accomplished anything as near as what a Terence Bud Crawford had, or also did not have a great resume and was way less active than them, and Terence Crawford beat them in every single category. That would make sense. But to be quite honest with you, Crawford has kind of been the recipient of a little bit of, I'm not going to say, overall, like, overrating his career a little bit, but a lot of fans overall, or a lot of boxing media, to be quite honest with you, they have overrated his career to a tiny degree. And it's not that, I think that as an all around fighter that he's quote unquote overrated, but his resume has never been great. And even Terence Bud Crawford knows that. It is what it is. Now, that's not me stating that his resume is trash necessarily. We all know that he has about 4 or 5 A grade level wins in his career. Of course, the Sean Porter win, the Errol Spence win, the Israel Madrimov win, the Victor Postel win, and the Yuriorkis Gamboa win. But at the end of the day, we have to create a criteria, at least a consistent criteria of what makes a fighter someone as an A-grade level name on Terence Bud Crawford's resume. And the thing is this, if you're going to claim, for example, that Inoue is quote unquote beating a lot of bums, even though he's beaten a lot of champions, he's beaten a lot of guys that have held titles. If you're going to claim that those guys are bums, well, at the end of the day, the thing is that Terence Bud Crawford, it's not like he was just fighting the gold mine of champions. At the end of the day, a lot of the guys that he fought, they were bums, or they were guys that were clear B or C grade level fighters. You're not going to sit here and tell me that Thomas Delorme, when he fought him for the vacant championship, that Delorme was just this high level fighter, or that Felix Diaz was this A grade level fighter. Now, of course, we'll talk about that later, because of course, what certain people will say, oh, well, he was a gold medalist in the Olympics, right? So are a multitude of other fighters, and they never accomplished shit. Like, what am I supposed to do with that? What am I supposed to do with someone who won a gold or silver medal, in the Olympics, but then they never even became a champion? That's like me giving Vasily Lomachenko an A-grade level win over Luke Campbell because Luke Campbell was a gold medalist. Like, get the fuck out of here. It is what it is. Anyways, but let's get into the video because, of course, what Johnboxing is going to try to state is that it's disrespectful to put Usyk or Inoue as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter. Now, I would even get the debate with Inoue to a certain degree because I don't think that Inoue is fighting a lot of A-grade level fighters. But you can't bitch, moan, and complain about the quote-unquote resume of Inoue and stating that he doesn't belong over certain fighters or Junto Nakatani doesn't deserve to be over certain fighters. But then when it comes to Gervonta Tank Davis, who's never fought a true 50-50 level fight over a legit champion, someone that actually has held a belt, when it comes down to, and then you rank him within your top 5 pound per pound, and people just have to deal with it. And if you disagree, it's because you're racist or you're hating. So once again, there has to be a consistent criteria overall for me to at least somewhat respect your list. And I actually think that this list is very decent, but Crawford is no longer the #1 pound per pound fighter. I don't give a shit what anybody says. It is what it is. But I'm going to explain why as the video goes along. Right now, I would have to have Alexander Usyk. Now, if you debated Crawford at #1, I get it. But let's be honest. A lot of the people that still are clinging on to the Crawford is clear #1 pound per pound, all that other stuff. Let's be real. We know what type of channels are doing it. It is what it is. And it pretty much starts with the LDBC and new media. But anyways, let's get into it. Let's see what Johnboxing has to say.
There's my pound for pound list. Okay? You don't gotta agree with it, but you have to respect it. Just like you have to respect.
Well, you don't always actually have to respect the pound for pound list because some pound for pound lists make no sense whatsoever. And it's clearly that they have favoritism or racial bias or whatever it may be. Now, this pound for pound list, in my view, actually, it's a very good pound for pound list. These are pretty much all the fighters that I would have within my top 10 pound per pound. Crawford, I would have him either at #2 or #3 at the moment. And the reason why that is because Crawford has not fought ever since last year. Now, of course, if he had beaten a very good name or fought 2 times last year and, won 2 belts last year, then I'd say, okay, you know what, still place him at #1, or it's very highly debatable between him and Usyk, maybe even giving Crawford the slight edge. But the last fight that he was in was over a champion by the name of Israel Madrimov, someone that we had never seen fight elite level competition before. He got a vacated title, and beat someone that we had never heard of before. Crawford had a 7 rounds to 5 fight with that guy. 2 of the judges, I believe, scored a 7 rounds to 5. And then we just seen Israel Madrimov against Virgil Ortiz. And Ortiz, to be honest with you, looked better than what Terence Bud Crawford did. He hurt Israel Madrimov more times in that fight. He probably beat him, in my personal view, debatably a little bit wider than what a Terence Bud Crawford did. And then you have Usyk right now, who has completely unified the heavyweight division at 38 years old. At least he's 38 right now. Of course, he did it when he was 37 years old. But he's 38 years old, so we can't use the age excuse with Crawford. At least, but, we're going to talk about that later, because I've always stated this. Certain boxers, just because they're a certain age, doesn't always mean that they're at a low point in their career. And I've stated this. Like, when you take a look at Crawford, for example, he has more wear and tear on him in boxing than what an Alexander Usyk does. Now, when I made that comparison with Crawford and that of a Canelo Alvarez, I had certain Crawford fans that stated, what are you talking about? Because Canelo Alvarez is 3 years younger than Crawford. Why are you stating that in boxing years that Crawford is actually younger than that of a Canelo Alvarez? Because Canelo's been fighting for 20 years. When you talk about, and he's been fighting top level competition for the last decade of his career. And on top of that, he's a guy that has actually fought legitimate bigger opponents. There's no offense against Terence Crawford, but I've never seen him in the ring with someone that I would count as a legit A-grade level fighter. And I said, wow, like he has a noticeable size disadvantage, like what Canelo did over Danny Jacobs or what he did over Caleb Plant or Kovalev or Jaime Munguia or someone like that. Never seen it. Just is what it is. And I know that certain people are going to say, well, Errol Spence was a little bit bigger. He was a bit girthier, but combined with the reach advantage that Crawford had, it pretty much had evened out. And it was the same thing with Madrimov. Madrimov was a bit girthier than Crawford, sure, but Crawford was a guy that clearly can fit well there, and he was a guy that had, what, a 5-inch reach advantage over him? So please.
My platform. You guys are entitled to have your own pound-for-pound list, just like I'm entitled to have my own pound-for-pound.
And like I said, I think this pound-for-pound list actually is quite good. Crawford would be a number 2 or number 3 for me right now. Usyk, I would have to have a number 1. I don't even think that it's really that debatable. There's just no one that has done what he has done. To be honest with you, yes, there have been 3 fighters that have had, undisputed runs in 2 separate weight classes. I would say that Inoue is probably the weakest out of all 3. And I know that certain people would disagree, but it is what it is. I mean, the 122 run was pretty strong because I thought that he defeated an A-grade level fighter in Fulton and debatably an A-grade level fighter in Dupilas. Someone who beat Akhmadaliev or, that one Uzbekistani fighter. And then, of course, after that, I would have Crawford at number 2. And then after that, I would have to have Usyk because he defeated a very talented cruiserweight division. He ran through everybody there. That was not an easy weight division to unify. And Usyk pretty much all made them look like casuals, And then he went up to the heavyweight division, clearly beats AJ Anthony Joshua and clearly beats Tyson Fury. Could you imagine if Deontay Wilder would have done that? If Deontay Wilder would have went into the fight and, clearly overall had outboxed both Tyson Fury and AJ Anthony Joshua, the LDBC and new media would be calling Deontay Wilder a top 5 heavyweight of all time. So once again, let's not discredit Usyk here just because a black fighter, in your view is, overall you want to put him as the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter. Now, if you debate Crawford as the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter, in my view, it's not really quote-unquote disrespecting Usyk. I just don't agree with it. I just think that Usyk, once again, I just think that he has too much on his side right now. The level of activity, the level of dominance, at least as of recent within Crawford's last fight. And on top of that, with the unifications that he had. Crawford was the first man overall to be unified in 2 separate weight classes. But to be honest with you, Usyk probably had the strongest unifications. And it's not like, in my view, that Crawford's unifications were weak per se. Because, of course, one of the final fights that he had at 140, of course, was against Victor Postol. That was a very big fight at the time. I don't think Postol is anywhere above an A- level fighter at his best, but, it is what it is. But, I mean, and then, of course, he ended up beating up Errol Spence, who is debatably a top 5 pound-for-pound fighter. So I get it. But the thing is with Usyk right now is that Fury also was debatably a top 5 pound-for-pound fighter on certain people's lists. So, I mean, overall, once again, I have to have Usyk right now just slightly above Crawford.
But here's my pound-for-pound list, okay? Like I said, you don't have to agree with it, but you have to.
And to talk about the other names on here, before I move on, Dimitri Bivol at 3. I mean, some may debate that that's a little high, but he does have wins over Canelo. Even though, of course, I thought that Canelo never really should have been in light heavyweight in the first place. But he does have a win over Canelo, Gilberto Soto Ramirez, John Pascal, Joe Smith Jr., and, of course, Artur Beterbiev in the rematch. So, I mean, it's debatable. He's not number 1 in my view, but, it's debatable that he's top 3. Canelo at number 4, I don't really mind. I seen Ring Magazine rank him at number 7, which I also don't really have a big problem with because even though Canelo Alvarez, even though I do think that the Munguia and the Jermell Charlo fights, I think that you can debate that they were A-, they still weren't quite on the same level. Of course, is a Bivol or a Beterbiev fight or, an Inoue versus Fulton or Crawford versus Spence or, Fury versus Usyk or even Usyk versus AJ for that matter. All those fights are looked at as bigger. So Canelo, even though he's still within that top 5 area, he has dropped a little bit in my view. Inoue at number 5, I think that's a bit low. I think I'd have him anywhere from number 3 to, anywhere from like number 2 to number 4. But I mean, I understand because it's not like he has the best resume in the world. But that being stated, Johnboxing and a lot of these, new media channels, they had Crawford as the number 1. Remember, he's supposedly the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter for the past, decade. He should have been number 1 pound-for-pound apparently even 10 years ago, right after Andre Ward. And the best fighter that he ever fucking defeated at that time would have been like Gamboa, or Postol. So, I mean, If that's your debate, well, then Inoue should have a rightful claim debatably as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter, because who's more dominant than Inoue right now? Nobody, you know? So it's just very funny how all of a sudden, you know, resume and level of competition pops up with Inoue. But with Crawford, there seems to be these rose-colored glasses, like he just fought all this A-grade level competition, and he didn't. But anyway, of course, going down the list, Haney, I mean, I think that's a bit high. The fact that he doesn't have a belt, and yes, you know, the win that Ryan Garcia got was called back, but at the end of the day, Devin Haney was not supposed to look like that. He cannot be above Jesse Bam Bam Rodriguez, in my view, right now, even though prior to the Ryan Garcia loss, Haney was very high on my list. But after that performance, I just can't do it. You know, and of course, Gervonta Tank Davis, in all honesty, I mean, he's around there, but to be honest, after that recent performance that he had, it's even a debate if he's on the pound-for-pound list, in my view, because it's not like he has a stellar resume. So, anyways.
Respect it. Now, I want to talk Terence Crawford, because a lot of people keep disrespecting him by placing Inoue and Usyk over him.
But placing Usyk above Terence Bud Crawford is not disrespecting Terence Bud Crawford. You're only saying that because, let's be real, you're one of these pro-blackities overall on this on these YouTube channels, you know, that basically you get your feelings hurt whenever you don't see a black fighter being #1 pound-for-pound. That's why it's very hard overall, once again, to ever trust rankings from these guys, because they're always going to be in the victimization mentality and always have a racialist mindset first. So even if there's a great debate that Usyk is over Terence Bud Crawford, and even Johnboxing pound-for-pound has admitted that himself, he's still going to claim that it's quote-unquote disrespecting, you know, that of Terence Bud Crawford. How's it disrespecting that of Terence Bud Crawford? Crawford's last fight was almost a year ago. He's only fought once ever since the Errol Spence Jr. fight. He had a 7 rounds to 5 fight in a weight class that he's still, you know, somewhat sizable in, against a fighter that we had never really heard of before, at least not a guy that ever would have been in the elite category. Virgil Ortiz just recently fought him, probably performed better against him. Crawford hasn't fought ever since then. Usyk has fought like, what, 4 or 5 times ever since out of the Errol Spence Jr. fight, against all the A-grade level fighters in the heavyweight division, guys that are 20 to 40 pounds bigger than him. Usyk pretty much all made them look like fools, even Tyson Fury. And you're telling me that it's disrespecting Crawford to put Usyk above him? Like, come on. And then on top of that, even Inoue's case, well, if you're one of these guys that debate that Crawford should have been top 10 or #1 pound-for-pound 10 years ago, well, then Inoue should have a great case. Because there's no offense, but in my personal view, you know, Inoue actually has a better case, in my personal view, as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter right now than when Crawford did 10 years ago. Because who the fuck did he really have on his resume 10 years ago? He had, you know, Yuriorkis Gamboa. That was it.
Usyk, I don't.
And of course, some people may say Victor Postol, but Postol did not happen, I believe, until about, you know, overall 2016. Now, if I'm wrong about that, somebody correct me.
Really have much of a problem with him being placed above Terence Crawford. A few videos ago, I said that Usyk, if him and Crawford were the same size, could beat Terence Crawford or come close to beating Crawford because of his style.
Right, but we can't always go by that, man. We can't always go by that, because a lot of that is hypothetical. Now, of course, for a lot of us that, you know, watch boxing, of course, we know some of what we're watching to a certain degree. But the thing is that a lot of people don't really know what the fuck they're watching. That's why when people talk about the Crawford versus Canelo fight, like, you have these idiots out here that are saying that, oh, Crawford is 10 times the fighter that Canelo Alvarez is. It's like, dude, you can't be 5 foot. I've said this so many times. You can't be 5'7" with a 71-inch arm reach and beat guys that are all the way from middleweights to light heavyweights. Like, it's impossible. You have to be not even exceptionally skilled. You have to be all-time greatly skilled, like God-gifted skilled, in order for that to happen. Like, not even Julio Cesar Chavez would have been able to do that over certain fighters. It is what it is. Anyways.
I am on record stating that about Usyk. Now, my reasons for Terence Crawford.
And once again, another reason why I don't like to go, you know, by that standard is because Gervonta Tank Davis, for example, he just looked like shit in his last fight. And to be honest with you, that could probably be labeled as somewhat of a cherry pick gone wrong. He brought up a fighter one weight class, a guy that had 10 total knockouts on his record, a guy that had already lost to Jamel Herring, And Gervonta Tank Davis fans just want you to think like, oh, well, because he didn't look invincible like what he regularly does. Well, to be quite honest with you, Gervonta Tank Davis has never looked invincible. He didn't look invincible against, that of Frank Martin. He didn't look invincible against Rolly Romero. He didn't look invincible, against Hector Garcia. He didn't look invincible against Isaac Pitbull Cruz. He certainly didn't look invincible against that of Lamont Roach. So, I mean, like, it's not like this is the first time that Gervonta Tank Davis has lost rounds. So I mean, it's like, come on.
For being number one, it's simple. I just think that he's a better fighter than everybody on this list. He was the first one to become undisputed without the sport of boxing having an undisputed champion.
Right. Well, I personally believe that Inoue is a better fighter than, overall possibly that of a Dimitri Bivol and a Devin Haney. To be honest with you, I don't even think that it's really that debatable, at least when you talk about the all-around skill set. But the thing is that if the guy has the better resume, that's what you have to go off of first, period. But you notice all of a sudden that when it comes to all-around skill set, that within a way that it just gets thrown out the window. Even though he completely outboxed someone like a Stephon Fulton, and was able to dominate other guys. So, I mean, once again, why is it that Crawford gets, overall certain favoritism from these guys, but Inoue doesn't? I think we all know the answer.
And then he was the first male fighter to become a two-division undisputed.
Now, certain people over may ask, well, why are you personally reviewing this video, but you're not reviewing Ring Magazine or other, are you a anti-black channel or something like that? No. But the reason why I do this is because this is the easiest thing to fall for. This is the low-hanging fruit. It's the easiest thing to fall for. Well, the reason why Crawford isn't ranked number one pound for pound is because of a racist issue. No, the reason why he's not ranked as the number one pound for pound is because of a multitude of qualities. But you have to know shit about boxing to actually know what the hell you're talking about. That's the reason why I talk about these videos so much. Because Ring Magazine, of course, I'll probably do a video on that as well. But the thing is that so many of these channels, they want you to believe that Crawford or some of these other fighters like Gervonta, like, oh, they're not ranked higher because they're black fighters. Well, is it really because of that? Or is it because that overall they don't deserve to be as high as what they are? Now, of course, are there certain fighters on a pound for pound list that don't deserve to be there on every pound for pound list? Like Junto Nakatani, maybe debatably. Yeah, I understand it. Did Roman Gonzalez, in my view, really deserve to be the number one pound for pound fighter at that time? No, not my personal view. I get it. But the thing is that those guys are going to complain about that, about how they had such a lack of a resume. Who the fuck was Terence Bud Crawford fighting 10 years ago? These guys keep trying to claim this narrative that Crawford, that he's just been the number one pound per pound fighter, for 10 years. How can you be the number one pound per pound fighter when at one point in time, 10 years ago, all the way back in 2015, the best name on your resume is Yuriorkis Gamboa, and that's it? Then the other names are Ricky Burns and Raimundo Beltran. You're telling me that's a number one pound for pound level resume? Like, get the fuck out of here.
World champion. Crawford did that.
And then on top of that, Crawford was only a one-weight division champion at that given moment in time. He became a two-weight division champion, I believe, all the way back in 2016. So when these idiots will tell you this shit about overall, like, oh, Crawford's been really number one pound per pound for like the past 10 years, they have no idea what the fuck they're talking about.
Not Usyk and not Inoue. They did that after Terence Crawford. Terence Crawford was the first male fighter to become undisputed in two weight classes. And he didn't do it.
Right, that's great, but just because you're the first man to do it, does that mean that you should be ranked above other fighters that did it later on? I mean, Conor McGregor is a guy that was the first one to hold belts in two weight classes simultaneously. Would anyone put him above someone like, maybe, a John Jones or something like that? Would anyone put him above, certain guys like that? Because, Conor McGregor was the first one to do it. Of course, Conor McGregor later on, he was a guy that, he would take multiple losses. But at the end of the day, still, it's like, come on.
Against weak opposition. He did it against what many people consider top competition.
No, he didn't. That's another bullshit lie. And once again, the Crawford fans, they always do this shit. He's done this over top level competition. When he had his 135-pound run, no one took a look at Ricky Burns and said, wow, that's an A-grade level fighter. No one ever said that. When he fought Gamboa, that was the biggest fight that he had there. Then after that, he fought Raimundo Beltran. No one even knew who the fuck Raimundo Beltran was. Only reason why people knew who Raimundo Beltran was is because he was the one that really should have beat Ricky Burns, but they robbed him and gave him a draw, and he broke Ricky Burns' jaw, and then Crawford ended up beating the shit out of Ricky Burns. Then, of course, at 140, his first title fight is against Thomas Delorme for a vacant title. Someone that already was knocked out against an Argentine fighter in Luis Abrego, I believe, some B-grade level fighter that was known, overall for pretty much losing a lot of the bigger fights. Then later on, he fights guys like Felix Diaz and Jerry Jean, all this other shit. So when people tell you all this stupid bullshit about how Crawford has been #1 pound for pound really ever since Andre Ward retired, no, he hasn't been. Because once again, when he overall fought that at Victor Postol, when it came down to Victor Postol, that fight happened in like 2016, 2017, I believe. So how can you say that he was top 10 pound for pound, overall even 10 years ago? It just doesn't make any sense.
Errol Spence Jr. was regarded as a top 5 pound for pound fighter before losing to Terence Crawford. And Terence Crawford went in there and completely destroyed Errol Spence Jr. And I know some people are going to bring up the car accident. Listen, the car accident may have some effect on Errol Spence.
Well, I'm not really going to bring up the car accident. But listen, the thing is that people always love to bring up this shit about, oh, this fighter was out of their prime, or this fighter overall was washed up. Listen, the fighter to me that is quote unquote washed up, they don't do what Errol Spence Jr. was able to do to both Danny Garcia and Yordenis Ugas when Errol Spence pretty much made Yordenis Ugas look like a whooping boy, overall in that fight. That's not a fighter who's completely done. Now, if you maybe want to say that he wasn't quite as fresh for that fight because of the 14th month layoff, or maybe Spence wasn't at his absolute peak, I mean, you can say that if you want to. But in my personal view, Crawford was just the perfect type of style to beat that of an Errol Spence Jr. He just was. And we kind of figured that out about certain fighters overall after certain fights. There are just certain styles that, at the time when a fight happens, it looks like it's top 5 pound for pound between the two of them. And we look at it and we say, wow, like that should overall be a fight that's 50-50. And then sometimes it ends up not being that. Like Gerald McClellan versus Julian Jackson. That was a fight that at the time was very highly acclaimed. It only lasted 2 rounds. When you talk about Tyson Fury versus Wilder, that was looked at as a fight that was a pound for pound level fight, at least debatably. At least at the very least top 20 pound for pound. Tyson Fury ended up completely embarrassing him. It wasn't close in the final 2 fights. So that, just is what it is. Ali versus George Foreman as well. There are just certain fights that end up happening like that. Inoue versus Fulton.
But it didn't stop Errol Spence from winning fights after the car accident. He did beat Danny Garcia. He beat Danny Garcia very convincingly. He went on ahead and dominated Yordenis Ugas. So we can't sit there and say, well, the car accident took a lot out of Errol Spence. We don't know because of how Errol Spence looked.
Well, here's the thing that I'm personally going to say. I have no problem with overall what Johnboxing is stating here. Stating, overall that we can't claim that Errol Spence was washed up. And I agree with that. But let's also do the same thing for other people's resumes. Because, for example, when people try to debate that Canelo has a way greater resume than Crawford, because he does, that's just a reality. You have these guys saying like, oh, well, when he fought Golovkin and Danny Jacobs and these guys, they weren't really in their prime. All that is horseshit. Gennady Golovkin was a guy that, yes, he was 36 years old, but he was still the unified middleweight champion of the world, and Canelo was able to have a very close fight with him, but he beat him, is what it is. Then Danny Jacobs, he became a 2-time champion at that current moment in time, beat the undefeated Sergey Dervyachenko. All right, remember, when Danny Jacobs ended up defeating Sergey Dervyachenko, he was washed up to get his second title in his career, but when Jamal Charlo did it, all of a sudden Sergey Dervyachenko is this big shit. And Sergey Dervyachenko, when he lost to Danny Jacobs, that was when he was undefeated. So once again, I have no problem overall people saying that, but let's also stop spreading this bullshit about other fighters, about people who are quote unquote washed up when they were not really washed up. A washed up fighter is a fighter that either A, is so much more of a shell of themselves that they're not recognizable, or on top of that, when it comes down to it, that, that they're never going to win a belt again. Now, are there certain fighters that overall, that they're clearly not the same anymore, but they're still championship level caliber? Yeah, of course. Like when Mayweather had fought Oscar De La Hoya, was a champion, but he was nowhere near his peak. He was not in his prime anymore. But he was still an A-grade level win. He was still looked at as one of the better fighters in the world. So that's why I say you have to be very careful with that quote of quote-unquote washed up. People love to use it, overall whenever they want to tear down a certain fighter that they want to tear down. Now, of course, in Crawford's defense, Many people, of course, say that Sean Porter and Errol Spence were washed up. I don't personally believe that they were washed up. Now, I think that you can debate that Sean Porter was not as motivated maybe for the Crawford fight. I think that you can definitely debate that, but the fight that Porter gave him, it definitely was still, a fighter that was at an A- level point in their career at the very least. Now, if you're talking about Kell Brook and Amir Khan, yes, those fighters are washed. There was no chance that those guys are ever going to win belts ever again. None. So those guys were washed. But when you talk about, Porter, Spence, no, those guys in my view were not washed.
After his car accident, he looked good in both fights.
But one thing that I'll have to state about Usyk is this, and not a lot of people really talk about this, but he defeated a lot of undefeated cruiserweight guys at that cruiserweight division that would have been looked at as very relatively talented. He defeated an undefeated Maris Bradis. He defeated, I believe the undefeated Glowacki, someone who was very decently talented and had knocked out Marco Huck. He ended up defeating the undefeated Michael Hunter, still the only loss in Michael Hunter's career to this day. And you're talking about a fighter in Michael Hunter that knocked out Martin Bacoli, and a guy that also ended up, having a draw with Alexander Povetkin. He also ended up, I believe, beating Murat Gassiev, clearly, who was undefeated. And Murat Gassiev, he was a guy that, was able to knock out a very decently talented and very athletic Cuban fighter by the name of Yornier Dorticos. So once again, that cruiserweight division was not anything to scoff at. But because a lot of those fighters were European, and the cruiserweight division is not looked at as something that is exceptionally talented, even though it was pretty talented at the time, not saying that those fighters were A+ necessarily, but they definitely were A grade in my personal view, at least some of them. Usyk does not get as much credit as really what he deserves for that weight class. In my personal view, that run that Usyk had at the cruiserweight division was stronger, probably than Crawford's run at 140. And certain people overall, they're going to disagree with that, but to be honest with you, I mean, who really is the better all-around fighter, Victor Postol or, Murat Gassiev? I mean, it's no offense against, Victor Postol, but it's not like he accomplished great things after the Crawford fight. He had that one big win in his career over Lucas Matisse. It's not like Crawford knocked him out, and then he ends up losing every big fight in his career after that. So it's no offense, but it's not like, Crawford fans try to act like, oh, well, Victor Postol was a part of the Ukrainian, amateur type of style. Victor Postol is of the stiff Ukrainian archetype. That's what he is. He's not a Lomachenko. He's not a Usyk. So people will try to compare him to Lomachenko Usyk. That's not how he fights. That's not what he is. That would be like comparing David Morrell, the Cuban fighter, to Rigondeaux versus Lara, which a lot of people did because they don't compare it off of any depth. They compare it basically off of a stereotype or a surface level comparison.
Looked good in the Danny Garcia fight, and he looked damn good in the Yordenis Ugas fight. So we can't use the car accident as an excuse. Terence Crawford dominated Errol Spence Jr., a top 5 unified champion. The fight wasn't even close. And that's what separates Crawford from the rest of the top 5 pound-for-pound fighters. All these guys that are considered top 5 or on the list struggle with their competition. Alexander Usyk had 2 close competitors.
Well, that's not necessarily true. When you talk about that of Inoue, in a way, he has not really struggled with his competition all that much. In a way, to be quite honest with you, if you want to talk about quote-unquote struggling with competition, Inoue has really been the most dominant fighter that I've seen, at least during my time of watching boxing. I've never seen a fighter as dominant as him. Now, that being stated, it is a little bit tough to judge because I don't think that he's fought that many A-grade level fighters. I think that you can debate maybe about 3, maybe 4 at most, but clear A-grade level victories. I mean, we have Steve Von Fulton, and I mean, to be honest with you, that may be debatably about it. I would maybe put Marlon Dupilas there as well because he defeated the very talented Akhmed Aliyev or MJ, that one Uzbekistani fighter. But I mean, some people would even debate that, so it's up to you.
Competitive fight with Tyson Fury. 2 close competitive fight.
Right, but here's the thing, Mr. Johnboxing pound for pound. We can't compare the Usyk versus Tyson Fury fight to the same way as what a Terence Crawford versus Errol Spence Jr. fight was. Because first of all, in my view, not only is Fury actually more all-around skilled than an Errol Spence Jr., and I know that certain people are not going to agree with that, but it is what it is. Errol Spence is not someone that fights great in a multitude of ways. He just doesn't, and that's why Crawford beat the living shit out of him the way that he did. But the thing is that Usyk heading into that fight, he was not the favorite heading into the first fight. He was a guy that was 6'3", with Fury being 6'9". A guy that has what, an 83 to 85-inch arm reach, and Usyk has a 78-inch reach. At the end of the day, Usyk was outweighed by 30 plus pounds, I believe, in the first fight, when you want to talk about that. And then in the second fight, he's outweighed by 60 plus pounds. So Fury, even when he was lighter, or even when he was heavier, Usyk was able to beat him. And someone that is a pretty skilled fighter for those weight classes, like, and has shown that he's an exceptionally skilled fighter when he trains hard, and a guy that actually takes his opponent seriously, like Dillian White Wilder and of course Vladimir Klitschko. So I mean, Tyson Fury is not anything to scoff at whatsoever.
Artebet Abib and Dimitri Bivol had 2 close competitive fights. 2. And those fighters are Artebet Abib and Dimitri Bivol were considered equals. Tyson Fury or Alexander Usyk were considered equals.
Right, but if Alexander Usyk and Tyson Fury are equals, what does that really say about Alexander Usyk? Because if Terence Crawford and Canelo Alvarez, if they get into a fight, in my view, that's really the only way to compare it. A lot of people are going to be favoring Canelo Alvarez in that fight because of the size and the combined skill. Now, a lot of people are saying that, oh, this is a 50-50 level fight because Crawford is way more skilled than Canelo. No offense, but those people really have no idea what the fuck they're talking about. It is what it is. Anyone, of course, who has watched Canelo Alvarez fight and box, he is an exceptionally skilled level boxer. And he's pretty much on the same level as a Crawford. Is what it is. But anyways, once again, what does that say about Usyk, that he can be outweighed by 20 plus pounds, against Tyson Fury, a guy that is outlengthened by several inches in both height and reach, and Usyk is still able to beat him? What does that say?
And they fought each other like they were their equals. On paper, Spence and Crawford were considered equals, but Crawford dominated Errol Spence, and he wasn't even close.
He dominated Errol Spence, yes, he did. But at the end of the day, is Errol Spence, was he a guy that overall, once again, was as big compared to Crawford as what Fury was to Usyk? No.
And this is why Crawford is number 1 on my list.
To be honest, Usyk did something that was really never supposed to happen in the first place. He did something overall that, I mean, of course, Crawford was the first man to become undisputed, in 2 separate weight classes. But Usyk became completely undisputed against the best of the best that the heavyweight division had to offer. He ran through a very talented cruiserweight division, and then he went to the heavyweight division where it was still very talented, although, of course, some of these fighters have their flaws, and he was able to stop Danny Dubois, and he was able to really make AJ Anthony Joshua, look like an amateur. And, of course, he was also able to outbox Tyson Fury. That was never supposed to happen. That was something that even Evander Holyfield for his day could not do. At least when you talk about beating the great big heavyweights, at least consistently. Now, of course, there's going to be some debate about how skilled Fury is, or, AJ Anthony Joshua Dubois is, comparative overall to those guys, of the 90s or something like that. And maybe you can claim that, but I mean, the size advantage was still there. And those guys overall, they're not the worst skilled fighters in the world. Otherwise, they would not have become champions over the likes of the fighters that they had fought. Danny Dubois has recently defeated, Philip Perkovich. He's defeated AJ Anthony Joshua. And he also ended up knocking out Jarrell Big Baby Miller, who just had a draw with Andrew Ruiz. So, a lot of the narratives, of course, would be that, oh, these heavyweights wouldn't last, even a minute in the 90s. Well, is that really true? Or, is that something that you want to be true, so you don't want Usyk overall, being higher than, what you want him to be ranked?
He's number 1 because of the way he handled what many people consider his equal. He dominated Errol Spence Jr. And so Terence Crawford becoming undisputed at the junior welterweight division, practically cleaning out that division, and then moving up to the welterweight division.
Well, let me talk about that very quickly. Because when we talk about Terence Bud Crawford, quote unquote, cleaning out the division, the way that he had cleaned out the division is that he won 1 belt against Jeff Horn, who was never really an A-grade level fighter in the first place, and gave 1 all-time great level fighter a very tough fight, and then was never heard from again. That pretty much was about it for him. Someone who's a very one-dimensional fighter, But, anyways, he ended up winning the title there, and then he pretty much fought several bums afterwards. Let's just be real. Up until Sean Porter and Errol Spence Jr. So when people say that he cleaned out that division, it's not like he did what Alexander Usyk did or something like that. Usyk actually had cleaned out, overall that of the cruiserweight division when he was unified. Now, when you talk about the heavyweight division, I'm not going to say that he's cleaned out the whole division, but he beat the 3 guys that really matter there. Crawford only really beat 2 relevant names there. It just is what it is. When you want to talk about the person that actually cleaned up that weight class, it actually was Errol Spence. Because he had fought Ugas and Brook and, Sean Porter and Mikey Garcia, who eventually moved up. And of course, he fought Danny Garcia, and there might even be another name that I'm not thinking of. Crawford did not really quote unquote clean out that division, but he did beat, 2 of the better guys there, and he beat the guy that was looked at as the best, of course. So of course, Crawford gets a lot of credit for that. But let's not act like he just fought all the best guys there. He fought 2 of them. That was really about it.
And practically destroying everybody that he fought at the
Right, but come on. I mean, Jose Benavidez, no offense. But is anyone taking a look at Jose Benavidez and saying, wow, A-grade level fighter? Like, if Jose Benavidez at his absolute best, if Idris Velasquez and Jose Benavidez, if those 2 fighters right there, Jeff Horn, if those 2 fighters at their absolute best night ever, if those 2 guys at their absolute best, if they were in a fight against Danny Garcia or Yordenis Ugas, 2 guys that were never even looked at as top 2 or top 3 for that weight class, when it comes down to it, would they even beat those fighters? The answer is probably no. So give me a fucking break about, oh, Crawford, he's defeated everyone that he fought there. Well, then why the fuck are we not talking about Inoue in a better light? Because Inoue's destroyed everybody that he's fought, and at least the guys that he's destroying have been either former champions or current champions. So, I mean, why does Inoue not have such a great body of work, but Crawford can fight these bums, and apparently it's a great resume? Like, give me a break.
welterweight division to become the undisputed welterweight champion. It's kind of hard for people to place anyone above him. Like I said,
Well, it probably would have been had he remained there and had he still fought big level fights. But he didn't. He took an Israel Madrimov fight, which I think is a relatively good win. I think it's an A- level win, but Virgil Ortiz just fought him, had probably a better performance. Crawford had a 7 rounds to 5 performance. He hasn't fought ever since then. Usyk has fought about 3 more fights in Terence Crawford ever since then, and his level of competition recently has been better. And he was more dominant against Tyson Fury than what Crawford was against Madrimov. So once again, I'm sorry, love Crawford, all-time great level fighter, wish him the best, but he's not the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter right now.
the fighters or the fighter that was considered his equal, the fight that everybody wanted to see was him and Errol Spence Jr. And it wasn't in high demands for no reason. Their fight was in high demands because everybody thought that this was a 50-50 fight. Errol Spence and Terence Crawford were considered equals, both pound for pound. And Terence Crawford went in there and completely destroyed Errol.
And here's my question for you, Mr. Johnboxing pound for pound. Even though you don't have Gervonta Tank Davis top 3 pound for pound, you love to complain about Inoue disrespectfully apparently being ranked number 1, number 2, or is up there, but you don't have a problem with Gervonta Tank Davis being ranked number 3. When has Gervonta Tank Davis ever been shut out dominant in one of his bigger fights? Other than Jose Pedraza, because he wasn't shut out dominant against Romero, and that was against a B-grade level fighter. He wasn't against Cruz. He definitely wasn't against Lamont Roach. He wasn't against, over Hector Garcia. So, does that mean that Gervonta Tank Davis, that he can never become the number 1 pound per pound fighter because this other fighter is more dominant, even if they have a lesser resume?
Spence Jr. Inoue, he did accomplish undisputed in 2 weight classes, but his body and work can't be compared to Terence Crawford's body and work, meaning that you can't compare Inoue's resume to Bud Crawford's resume.
Well, I would agree with that, but to be quite honest with you, Inoue and Crawford's resume, like, they're a little bit more close than what some people overall are really letting on. Like, it's no offense against Crawford, but Inoue is like 1 or 2 wins away from equaling Crawford's resume, if not even surpassing it. Because if he ends up beating Jesse Bam Bam Rodriguez, and then also, possibly maybe like one other name, like Junto Nakatani, his resume is probably going to be remembered as better than Crawford's. It just is what it is. Because Stephon Fulton, in my view, he was not top 10 pound for pound, but he would have been top 20. If he beats Junto Nakatani and Jesse Bam Bam Rodriguez, 2 fighters that are looked at as top 10 pound per pound, or at least debatably, his resume is, in my view, going to surpass Crawford's. It just is what it is.
You can't. Terence Crawford has a far greater resume than Inoue.
No, he doesn't. He has a better resume than Inoue, but he does not have a far better resume than Inoue. No, he does not. once again, you're overrating Terence Bud Crawford's resume. And I love Crawford once again. You know, I have to say this because I know all the emotional ass Terence Bud Crawford fanboys going to come in and say, what you talking about? Why you hating on Bud? You know, you anti-Bud. You know, I'm going to get all these fucking morons in here. But, you know, the thing is that Crawford, great fighter. Does not have an all-time great level resume. Does not.
Same thing for Alexander Usyk. You can't compare Inouye's resume to Alexander Usyk.
Right, but here's the thing. Who's really saying that you can really compare Crawford's resume to Usyk's? No offense, but once again, the 5A grade level wins that he has in his career are over Madrimov, Victor Postol, Gamboa, Porter, and Spence. And to be quite honest with you, you can debate that two of those fighters are not really true A grade level fighters. It's really a debate if Victor Postol and Madrimov are really true A grade level fighters. I mean, it just is what it is. When you talk about Usyk, you know, now if you're going to put Postol and Madrimov as A grade level fighters, then in my view, I would also have to put Glowacki for that weight class, someone who could legitimately box as an A- level fighter at the very least. Murat Gassiev as an A grade level fighter. Maris Bradis as an A- level fighter, you know, and also some of the other fighters that he defeated there. Michael Hunter, I mean, I'd probably have to put him as A- as well. Because Michael Hunter at least actually did something after the Usyk fight. He got 2 decent wins, or at least a draw over Povetkin and a win over Martin Bakole. 2 people that were somewhat relevant. What the fuck has Victor Postol, you know, overall ever done after the Crawford fight? He didn't do shit. He lost every big fight after that fight. And Postol was a big-ass 140-pounder.
You can't compare Inouye's resume to Dimitri Bivol or Arthur Beterbiev or Canelo Alvarez's resume.
Well, actually, I don't completely agree with that. I think that you actually somewhat can compare Inouye's resume to that of a Dimitri Bivol's. Now, I don't think that Inouye's resume is quite as good as a Dimitri Bivol's anymore because he has 3 confirmed A-grade level wins in my personal view at the least over Ramirez, Canelo Alvarez, and Beterbiev. And of course, 2 of those wins were over pound-for-pound level fighters. But to be fair, Inoue, Inoue didn't have a fighter that was in a weight class, in his weight class, that really didn't belong there ever in the first place, like a Canelo Alvarez. If Bivol, you know, overall did not defeat Artur Beterbiev in the rematch, to be quite honest with you, his resume will not be talked about as much.
But the fact of the matter is, Terence Crawford, in my opinion, has a better resume than Inoue. Yes, they both.
I think he does as well. But to state overall that it's just way better or that it's levels above Inoue, I'm sorry, no. It's a level, maybe 2 above, you know, Inoue because of the Spence win and Postol and all that other stuff. But to state that he just has a way better resume, no. Someone who has a way better resume than Inoue would either be Usyk or Canelo. You know, that would pretty much be about it.
Became undisputed in 2 weight classes, but Crawford has a better resume. Crawford is a former 3-division world champion, and two of those.
Now, what I will state is this: if you were to debate somebody else that actually had a better resume than, you know, Inoue or some of these other guys, you could debate Devin Haney. But the problem is, of course, is that right now he no longer has a belt, and of course, after that last performance, people are a little bit shaky as to where to put him.
Weight classes. Excuse me. He's a now currently a 4-division world champion. 2 of those weight classes he became undisputed at. All 3 weight classes, or all 4 weight classes Crawford has been at, he's became champion at. He was unified at the lightweight division, undisputed at the.
Right, and that's great, but I mean, how much is that argument really worth? Did Inoue not become a champion in every single division that he fought in? Did Usyk not become a champion in every division that he fought in? Did Canelo not become a division in every champion, you know, a champion in every division that he fought in? Like, how much is that really worth? Now, if you were to state that Crawford was, you know, dominant in every single weight class, without there being any competitive fights, then I would get it. But to be quite honest with you, that's not really the case either. What Crawford fans always try to tell you is that Crawford, like, you know, none of his fights have ever even been close. That's not true. He had a very tough fight over Aegis Kavaliauskas and Sean Porter. He had a very tough fight over Israel Madrimov and really was expected to do more in that fight. You know, he had a tough fight against Gamboa, someone who never really should have been at 135 in the first place. He was losing the first half of that fight.
Undisputed.
Now, of course, Crawford came back to beat all those guys or stop those guys. So I give Crawford a lot of credit. But this shit of Crawford just being, you know, he's never lost a round or all this other shit, like, come on. You know, like, people act like Crawford has, like, never lost a round in his career. Like, give me a break. Crawford's a great fighter, you know, but they overrate his resume to a certain degree.
at the
And to be honest with you, his dominance is a little bit overrated as well. And I know that, you know, a lot of people are gonna come at me with torches and pitchforks for that, but it is what it is.
welterweight division, and now he's world champion at the junior middleweight division. So it's kind of hard for people to place somebody above him when he's been dominating the sport of boxing way before damn near everybody on this list became a household name. Crawford, in case you guys forgot, has been dominating the sport of boxing when he first stepped in the ring, when he first stepped up in competition, when he fought British Prescott.
Right, but come on, British Prescott, bro. Now listen, I understand. You know, Crawford, that was his first major step up, and back then Prescott was looked at as a solid B grade level fighter. But the the standards have to be adjusted as time goes along. Like these guys overall, they always love to say that, oh well, Lomachenko has lost every big fight in his career, you know, even though he beat Walters and Gilmo Rigondeaux and Jorge Linares and also Gary Russell Jr. You know, they don't even count those wins. You know, that's like me saying, like, if I were to debate someone like that and say, oh, well, let's also not forget the wins over Luke Campbell, you know, and, and over, you know, overall Anthony Crawler. Like, come on.
That was the beginning of his pound for pound dominance when he fought.
And if we're talking about Inoue, the first time that Inoue ever stepped up in competition, at least that I remember, against Jamie McDonnell, a guy that was a champion at the time and bigger than him, Inoue knocked him the fuck out, I believe, in the first round. So, I mean, if we're going to bring this shit up, you know, Inoue has been the most dominant fighter really of the past decade.
British Prescott. Half these dudes on this list weren't even heard of yet. That's how long Crawford.
Right, but does that mean that those fighters don't deserve to potentially be over Crawford? Once again, Crawford fanboys, they always try to debate this bullshit. You know, that, oh, Crawford's been doing this for 10 years. Yes, he's been defeating bum-ass motherfuckers for 10 years. That's what he's been doing. All right? Is what it is. I know people are not going to like that, but like I said, he has 5 A-grade level wins in his career. No more, but debatably less. And I know that certain people are going to disagree, you know, but that's just, you know, that's the reality.
Has been dominating the sport. And again, everybody that he fought, he dominated.
Not true. But anyway.
He dominated everybody that he fought.
But anyways, that pretty much is about it for that video. I just thought that that was very particularly interesting. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. As of right now, I would not have Crawford as my #1 pound for pound fighter. He would be top 3. But he is going to have to fight a little bit more. Now, of course, apparently he's going to get, you know, try to get this fight with Canelo. Now, of course, if he beats Canelo, he probably would be the #1 pound for pound fighter because, of course, he would not be expected to win that fight, especially with the size disadvantage, at least in terms of weight that he would have. But, of course, even with Canelo Alvarez not being as lengthy or, you know, as tall of a fighter as a Crawford, he still would be expected to win because he's still an exceptional level fighter. You know, someone that a lot of people are actually underrating his skill set heading into this fight, in my view. You know, and then on top of that, you know, Canelo, of course, would have a massive, weight advantage. So if he ends up doing that, then yes, you can put Crawford, in my view, clearly as the #1 pound for pound. You know, but as of right now, I would have to say Usyk. You know, but we'll see what happens. But anyways, that pretty much is about it. We'll see what Crawford, what he could potentially do against Canelo Alvarez if that fight does occur. Because you never know, Canelo Alvarez is going to turn 35 this year. And he really is more like a 38 to 39-year-old because he's been fighting for probably a little over 20 years now. You know, so Canelo Alvarez is no spring chicken himself. But, you know, we'll see what ends up happening. He does fight against William Skull next, and we'll see how that fight goes. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.